Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. A recent U.S. Department of Health and Human Services investigation revealed that many patients are wrongly determined to be brain dead and are unquestionably alive by any standard. Dr. Joseph Eble joins us to talk about this. Dr. Joseph Eble is Vice President of Fidelis Radiology, former President of the Tulsa Guild of the Catholic Medical Association, and he is passionate especially about end-of-life care, adoption, and building bridges between persons of different ethnicity. He's a prolific author as well. He's authored and co-authored many articles on brain death, most recently, Catholics United on Brain Death and Organ Donation, a call to action. Joseph, great to speak with you. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on this show.
Oh, very glad to have you on to talk about this. I want to ask you to share with us what's going on here. What has the HHS decertified, and why does it matter to us?
Yeah, I'd like to make this as simple as possible for your listeners. So when you go in to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get a driver's license, you can choose whether or not to become an organ donor. And if you choose to become an organ donor, there's no informed consent, and you just check a box and you say, if I die, I'm willing to give my organs to someone else. And it's an altruistic notion. But the presumption is that you'll actually be dead when your organs are harvested. Now, there's a great deal of controversy about whether the two pathways by which you can be declared dead in order for your organs to be harvested, whether they're valid at all. And many people would argue brain dead patients are alive, and patients declared dead in this other pathway called DCD, they're also all alive. But if we assume, for the sake of argument, that all of those patients truly are dead, if they're actually brain dead or declared dead by DCD. Basically, what this U.S. Department of Health and Human Services investigation found was that 29% of the potential organ donors in this particular population demonstrated signs consistent with life. In other words, they didn't even meet the necessary criteria to be declared brain dead or dead by DCD. And so basically 3 out of 10 people were definitely alive, if they would have definitely been alive, had their organs been harvested. And so I think for us as Catholics, we very rightly are strongly pro-life, and we wish to uphold the sanctity of human life, but this is an issue that has sort of slipped through the cracks, unfortunately. And over the past many years, we've begun to realize more and more that there's a great deal of problems with this idea of organ donation after death. And this investigation by the Department of Health and Human Services is just another example of, even if you accept the theoretical validity of these notions, the pragmatic implementation of them is not there. And there's really not sufficient oversight to ensure that patients are being protected.
So what you're effectively saying is, based on this survey, we have some evidence to believe that perhaps up to 3 out of 10 patients have some neurological, physiological signs that demonstrate the likelihood of them being alive. Why are our bars so... Oh, go ahead, please.
I would say irrefutably they were alive. And that's really why the Department of Health and Human Services is hammered Network for Hope, which is the organ procurement organization under investigation, is because this is not a matter of argument. And so the argument is, if a patient is declared brain dead and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, is that patient actually dead? Well, people argue about that. If a patient is declared dead by DCD and their heart has stopped for 5 minutes, is that patient actually dead? And people argue about that. Now, I personally very, very strongly believe that those patients are alive. But even setting that aside, basically what the Department of Health and Human Services is saying is these patients were irrefutably alive. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And Network for Hope, which was the organ procurement organization, they pushed back and they said, hey, we're running a tight ship here. Everything is hunky-dory. And the Department of Health and Human Services said, well, let's just be safe. Let's investigate. Let's take a look. And when they looked under the hood, they found widespread disregard for the rules that they should have been following. And so now this was only an investigation of a single organ procurement organization. However, we have no reason to believe that this is not a widespread issue with other organ procurement organizations. And I remember in the New York Times article last year where they did this expose uncovering all these cases of patients being wrongly declared dead prior to organ harvesting. They interviewed a guy named Dr. Wade Smith from the University of California, San Francisco. Now, I don't know him, but I'm guessing he is not a super staunch pro-lifer, given that he's at UCSF.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think these types of problems are happening much more than we know. And so I think more and more people are becoming aware that this system is dysregulated. There is no oversight. There are substantial theoretical anthropological problems about the validity of these things at baseline. Then there are substantial pragmatic problems for actually assessing whether these theoretical things can be actually determined. And then, even above that, there's the simple fact that some people simply are ignoring the rules that should be in place. So basically, when you go down the line, you have this very deeply disturbing system where people are trusting that they will be truly dead when their organs are harvested. And yet, we have case after case after case come forward where patients were not dead. And RFK last year posted on X when the Department of Health and Human Services began this investigation. He wrote that some of these so-called dead donors have blood pressure and heart rate elevation at the time of organ harvesting. Now, that indicates that they're feeling pain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, this is grim. This is very grim. And it's a delicate topic. We want to be sensitive to all those involved, those who have received organ transplants, those who have donated their organs. But what we know now, we as Catholics have a moral obligation to really put the brakes on this thing, because as I wrote in the article in Catholic World Report, Pope Benedict XVI said, we must always err on the side of caution. If there is any question whether a patient is actually alive, we have to act so as to ensure that we respect the dignity of their life. And similarly, John Paul II said there must be moral certainty that these patients are dead before we act.
So, Joseph, let's pause right there. I'm talking with Dr. Joseph Eble, and we're talking about organ donation and brain death. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Joseph Eble. He and I are talking about the reality of declaring an individual brain dead despite the individuals having all the signs, neurological, physiological, of being alive. Now, Joseph, based on everything you've just shared in the last segment, one of the most important questions that's on the minds of every listener is how on earth are our standards that arbitrary that we can sanction not only murder, but frankly, the brutality of ripping organs out of someone who's ostensibly alive? How did we allow the medical industry to let that happen?
Well, we don't want to attribute to anyone malice or cruelty or anything like that. The history of brain death is a fascinating study, and to make a very long story short, what essentially happened is that the ability to transplant organs became possible in the 1960s. And in order to transplant vital organs, that is to say, organs of which you have only one, well, you cannot transplant an organ from a corpse.
Right.
And so, because the organ will be decaying, right? I mean, once someone dies, their body very quickly begins to disintegrate, to decay, because the principle of integration, the soul, has ceased to inform it. Soul separates from the body begins to come apart. And so a new definition of death was constructed, and that is what became known as brain death. And it was originally coined as irreversible coma in the original paper from 1968. And that would really be a more accurate descriptor. And irreversible might not be right either, because it's really just a very deeply comatose state. And so basically this deeply comatose state became legally and medically reconfigured into being quote unquote death. And this way, a source of fresh viable organs was available for transplantation into patients who needed them. Now, how a person is determined to be brain dead has evolved over the decades. But the interesting thing, basically, brain death proponents have always said there is essentially a 0% chance that a person will still be alive if they're declared brain dead. But then in every new iteration of the guidelines, they say, well, we've made these guidelines better to decrease the risk that someone will be alive. And you say, wait a second, well, wasn't there supposed to be no risk of them being alive in the first place? And so basically the answer is that you have had an increasingly standardized set of guidelines that have become increasingly more detailed. But nonetheless, those guidelines cannot ensure what they purport to, namely irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain.
Right.
And moreover, those guidelines are followed with varying degrees of rigor in the hospitals around the nation and around the world. And so even if, which I do not believe to be the case, but even if brain dead patients, if there truly were irreversible cessation of all brain function, let us say for the sake of argument, those patients truly were dead. Even if that were the case, first of all, we really can't demonstrate it. And second of all, even if we could demonstrate it, there's people who are not following the guidelines closely and are not doing what they need to in order to make sure that they're following these rules. How have we gotten to this point? Well, everyone wants to save life. It's a great story when someone can receive an organ and their lives can be saved. But what we have to remember is that we cannot save lives at the expense of taking someone else's life.
Yeah.
And that's the real rub. Right now, I would say where we are is this. We know there's a problem. All of us know there's a problem. I mean, if we're to be honest as Catholics, we know there is a serious problem with harvesting organs from so-called deceased donors because many, if not all, are still alive. But it's going to take a tremendous amount of fortitude on the part of doctors, priests, bishops, Catholic hospitals, Catholic bioethicists to say, hey, you know what? We need to look at this more closely. And perhaps some of what we did in the past, we shouldn't have done. But that is going to be a very, very difficult thing for us to do. But that's where we are. We're at the moment where it's time to place a pause and say, regardless of what we've done or allowed or permitted or even lauded in the past, now we know better, and we can't keep doing the same thing.
Is there a kind of stubbornness or pridefulness on the part of medical practitioners? And I don't mean to cast aspersions. I'm just saying as an industry.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, we doctors are notoriously arrogant. I mean, it's just, that's the reality.
Well, I'll say it was amazingly humble for you to admit that, but go on, please.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, intellectuals, academics, all of us, we're notoriously arrogant. And it's, you know, it's an impediment. And it requires real humility to be able to say, I was wrong. Yeah. I may have made a mistake. And I think what's hard is let us say that you are a doctor and you've been involved with declaring these patients dead or harvesting their organs. That's a really hard thing to even contemplate that perhaps these patients were actually alive, because I guarantee you every single one of those doctors who has done that has thought to himself or herself, I was doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. I was making the right call. So it requires a lot of humility to be able to even ask that question, because all of us want to feel like we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
None of us wants to be doing, you know, none of us wants to feel like we have chosen to hurt someone. And that's why it's so hard, is because it's not, you know, we're not trying to point blame. We're not trying to say you did something wrong or you're culpable or you're blameworthy to anyone. But nonetheless, we still have to pull back and say, you know what? From an objective reality standpoint, we can no longer justify continuing the practice of harvesting organs from deceased donors. And I think I can say that statement unequivocally as a Catholic. We as Catholics are unequivocally unable to justify continuing the practice of harvesting organs from so-called deceased donors. I mean, this investigation by the Department of Health and Human Services has just pointed front and center to the fact that many of these patients are alive. I mean, how many? Who really knows? But for us as Catholics, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right?
One is one too many.
Once you've said, hey, some of these patients are alive, you have to stop. And I think, I don't know, and I'll be honest, I'm somewhat befuddled why we have not, as Catholics, come out and made a clear, definitive reasonable statement about this. Not blaming anyone, not even necessarily making, statements about, we know this is wrong or this is right or whatever, but just saying, listen, we don't know, and the fact that we don't know is sufficient to guide practice.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we cannot be absolutely or even morally certain that these patients are dead, because we know unequivocally that at least some of them are alive by any standard. Therefore, we must stop this practice, at least for now.
Which means we have an uphill battle, just simply fighting for the lives of those who are in varying states of, being touted as brain dead. We have an uphill battle fighting for the dignity of their lives and fighting for their organs not to be ripped out of their living bodies. Joseph, thank you for drawing attention to this extremely important issue. I'm looking forward to future conversations with you.
Likewise. Thank you for your time.
My guest has been Dr. Joseph Eble. He's Vice President of Fidelis Radiology, former President of the Tulsa Guild of the Catholic Medical Association. We've been talking about the problems with the medical industry declaring individuals as brain dead, and therefore what that results in terms of quite literally the ripping out of organs from bodies that are actually alive, people that are actually alive, and thereby bringing about their death. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.